Emily had always been the kind of girl who noticed things that others didn't. She could sense when something wasn't right, even if no one else seemed to see it. That morning, as she sat by her bedroom window, she watched the sleek, expensive car pull up in front of their house, its black paint gleaming under the sunlight. From it stepped Daniel, impeccably dressed as always, with that same flawless smile he always wore. Sarah, her mother, was already at the door waiting for him, her face lit up with happiness as he approached to kiss her gently on the cheek. "You look beautiful as always," he told her, his voice smooth, rehearsed. Sarah laughed, that carefree, light-hearted laugh that Emily barely recognized anymore. The laugh of someone in love, someone who believed in everything they were seeing. But Emily just sat there, her arms crossed, quietly watching the scene unfold. She couldn't explain it, not even to herself, but there was something about Daniel that felt wrong. He was too perfect, too polished. The way he moved, the way he spoke, it all seemed calculated, like he was playing a role in a script only he knew. And when he turned to her with that same flawless smile and said, "Hi, Emily, how are you today?" she responded flatly, "Fine," not bothering to fake anything. Sarah immediately chided her for being rude, but Daniel just laughed it off like it didn't bother him. Still, Emily caught something in his eyes, a flash of something cold and calculating, there for only a split second, so quick she almost thought she imagined it. Almost. That brief moment planted a seed of suspicion that she couldn't ignore, no matter how much she wanted to believe her mother was making the right choice. Later that evening, after Daniel had left, Emily sat on her bed, her mind spinning with questions. She couldn't shake the image of his eyes, that fleeting glimpse of something that didn't match the warmth he tried so hard to show. Tossing and turning, she replayed the moment over and over, feeling a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. Finally, she couldn't keep it inside anymore. She got up, went to the living room where her mom was folding laundry, and sat down beside her. "Mom, do you really think Daniel is a good person?" she asked, her voice quiet but heavy with genuine concern. Sarah let out a long sigh, clearly exhausted by the conversation they'd had too many times before. "Emily, not this again. Daniel is a good man. You just need to give him a chance." But Emily shook her head, pressing further. "Doesn't it seem strange to you, the way he's always looking at me?" Sarah just laughed it off, waving her hand like it was nothing. "You're imagining things. Daniel likes you, Emily. He wants to be part of our family." Emily bit her lip, forcing herself not to say more. She knew there was no point. Her mom was in love, blinded by it, and no gut feeling from a 12-year-old girl was going to change that. So she swallowed her doubts, but deep down, the unease twisted even tighter, slowly becoming something that felt a lot like fear. The next morning at school, Emily couldn't get Daniel out of her head. As the other kids played basketball or chatted by their lockers, she leaned against the chain-link fence near the court, her eyes scanning the ground absently. She spotted her best friend, Chloe, walking toward her with that carefree bounce she always had, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside Emily. Without thinking, Emily grabbed Chloe by the arm and pulled her aside, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Chloe, I swear, there's something really off about Daniel," she said, her eyes wide and intense. Chloe rolled her eyes dramatically, folding her arms over her chest. "Emily, come on. You just don't like him because he's dating your mom. That's it, right?" Emily shook her head vigorously, her voice trembling as she replied, "No, it's not that. I have reasons. Real reasons." Chloe let out a long sigh, putting her hands on her hips. "Look, I get it. I do. It's weird seeing your mom with someone new, but sometimes you just have to let your mom be happy." Emily swallowed hard, feeling like Chloe just didn't understand the depth of her fear. "But what if he's dangerous?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Chloe laughed softly, shaking her head. "He's an entrepreneur, Emily. He drives a car that costs more than my house, wears designer clothes, buys your mom all these fancy gifts. What kind of dangerous guy does that?" Emily stood there, unable to argue. Chloe had a point. Daniel had all the markers of success, of a stable, respectable man. And yet, that unsettling feeling wouldn't leave her. She couldn't shake it, no matter how much she wanted to. As Chloe walked away to join some classmates, Emily stayed by the fence, hugging her arms tightly around herself, more confused and scared than ever. That night, as Emily sat alone in her bedroom, The events of the day kept replaying in her mind like a broken record. She couldn't focus on her homework, couldn't lose herself in a book like she normally would. The feeling that something was wrong had grown stronger, gnawing at her insides like a sickness. At one point, she looked up from her desk and caught sight of something in the mirror across from her bed. Her heart stopped. Standing in the hallway, just barely visible through the reflection, was Daniel. He wasn't moving, wasn't saying anything. He was just standing there, looking directly at her, with a strange, twisted smile that sent icy chills down her spine. Emily spun around instantly, but the hallway was empty. No one was there. Her breathing came out in sharp gasps as she stood frozen, staring into the void where he had been. She rubbed her eyes, telling herself it was just her imagination, but she knew what she saw. She had seen his smile, and it wasn't the kind of smile that reassured you. It was the kind that made every instinct in your body scream for you to run. That night, Emily barely slept. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against her window made her jolt awake, her heart racing. It felt like there was something lurking in the shadows of their home, something that didn't belong there. By morning, Emily was exhausted but resolute. She couldn't keep quiet anymore. She had to try again, had to make her mom see what was really going on, no matter how crazy it made her sound. Because now it wasn't just a bad feeling. Now she was scared, truly scared, for both her mom and herself. The following morning, as Sarah prepared breakfast in the kitchen, Emily decided she couldn't keep her fears bottled up any longer. She walked in slowly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as she watched her mom bustling around, humming softly as if everything in their world was perfectly fine. Emily sat down at the table, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Mom, I really need to talk to you," she said quietly. Sarah turned, setting down the coffee cup she was holding, and gave Emily a weary look. "Emily, not this again." Emily shook her head firmly, her voice trembling but determined. "Mom, I'm serious. Last night, I saw Daniel standing in the hallway, just staring at me through the mirror. But when I turned around, he was gone." Sarah let out a small, exasperated laugh, rubbing her temples. "Emily, you're letting your imagination run wild. You've always had such a vivid imagination. But this is getting out of hand." Emily stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm not making this up, I swear. He was there. He was just standing there, smiling at me like he knew I'd see him." Sarah sighed heavily, her patience wearing thin. "Emily, Daniel is a good man. He loves me. He's been nothing but kind and generous. You can't keep treating him like he's some kind of villain." But Emily couldn't hold back anymore. "But don't you think it's weird? Don't you think it's strange that he always stares at me so much? That he always seems to be watching everything I do?" Sarah shook her head, dismissing it with a wave of her hand. "He likes you, Emily. He wants to be part of our family, that's all." But Emily bit her lip hard, feeling the frustration rise inside her. Her mom just couldn't see it, and she realized, with a sinking feeling, that no amount of words would convince her. She'd have to find something more, something real, something undeniable. Later that afternoon, when Sarah left the house to run errands, Emily knew this was her chance. Her heart pounded as she crept into her mother's bedroom, the air thick with a sense of both guilt and urgency. She knew it was wrong to snoop, but at this point, she felt like she had no other choice. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Sitting at her mom's desk, Emily opened the laptop and hesitated for just a second before typing Daniel's full name into the search bar. Daniel Carter. She hit enter, her eyes scanning the screen rapidly. Nothing. Not a single article. Not a single photo. No social media profiles. No business pages. No mentions anywhere. Her brow furrowed deeper as she refreshed the page, double-checked the spelling, and tried again. Still nothing. A man as successful and polished as Daniel should have left a trail a mile long on the internet, but there was nothing. Emily's stomach dropped, a cold, sinking feeling spreading through her chest. People like Daniel didn't just exist without leaving any trace. Unless they were hiding something. Emily leaned back in the chair, her hands shaking slightly as she processed what she'd just discovered. For a brief moment, she considered telling her mom right then, showing her the empty search results as proof that something wasn't right. But she already knew how Sarah would react. Another dismissive laugh, another lecture about giving Daniel a chance. No, Emily realized she needed more than this. She needed hard, undeniable evidence, something even her mom couldn't explain away. Closing the laptop carefully, Emily stood up and left the room, her mind racing with possibilities. Whatever it took, she was going to find out who Daniel really was before it was too late. That evening, Daniel came over for dinner, as he often did, acting as though everything in their little world was perfect. Emily watched from her seat at the table as he carved a piece of steak and placed it delicately on her plate. "Emily, you should try this," he said with that ever-present, charming smile. But she just stared at the meat, then shook her head slowly. "No thanks." Daniel chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "She's always been a bit stubborn, hasn't she?" he said, turning to Sarah with a light, teasing tone. Sarah smiled, her cheeks slightly flushed, completely enchanted by him as usual. "She just needs time to get used to you," she replied, reaching over to squeeze his hand affectionately. But Emily kept her eyes fixed on him, watching every gesture, every expression. And then, as Daniel turned back to her and met her gaze, something shifted in his eyes. Just for a second, the warmth and charm faded, and there it was again, that cold, detached glint, like he was looking straight through her, calculating. "I hope we can be friends, Emily," he added, his voice perfectly even. But Emily didn't answer. She just sat there, frozen, feeling like her skin was crawling. And then he said it, so casually, so quietly that Sarah didn't even seem to notice. "Sometimes being too smart isn't a good thing." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, just sat there gripping the edge of her chair, her heart racing. Did he know she'd been looking into him? Was that a threat? She glanced at her mom, who was oblivious, smiling and sipping her wine, completely unaware of the silent war happening right across the table. Emily realized in that moment that she was completely alone in this. The next morning at school, Emily's mind was still reeling from the night before. She couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel knew something, maybe everything. She practically ran through the hallways, weaving between other students until she finally found Chloe standing by her locker, laughing about something with another friend. Without a second thought, Emily grabbed Chloe's arm and pulled her aside into a quiet corner near the back stairwell. "We need to talk. Now," Emily hissed, her eyes darting around to make sure no one was listening. Chloe raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "Let me guess. This is about Daniel again?" Emily nodded urgently. "Chloe, listen. I looked him up online last night. There's nothing. I mean, literally nothing. No social media, no business records, no news articles, nothing at all. That's not normal." Chloe sighed and looked away, clearly torn between dismissing Emily's fears and taking them seriously. "Maybe he just values his privacy," she suggested weakly. But Emily shook her head. "No. Someone like him, successful, rich, always out and about. He should have some kind of online presence. Everyone does. But it's like, he doesn't even exist." Chloe stared at her for a long moment, biting her lower lip. "Okay, so what do you want me to do about it?" Emily swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Help me find out who he really is. Please, I need someone who believes me." Chloe let out a slow breath and finally nodded. "All right, but Emily, if you're wrong about this, if it's just your imagination." Emily shook her head again, more determined than ever. "I'm not wrong." Chloe sighed. "Okay, we'll figure this out. Together." And for the first time in days, Emily felt a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe she wasn't completely alone after all. That night, Emily's nerves were frayed to the point of breaking. She couldn't stop thinking about Daniel's words at dinner, the way he had looked right through her, the sinister edge in his voice masked by that smooth charm. After her mom went to bed, Emily crept down the hallway, every creak in the old wooden floor making her heart pound louder in her chest. She paused near her mother's bedroom door, her hand hovering over the knob, considering waking her up and spilling everything she was feeling. But she knew it wouldn't matter. Sarah wouldn't believe her, not without something solid. Emily turned and padded quietly toward the living room, where Daniel's coat had been hanging earlier, but it was gone. Frustrated, she made her way back to her room, her mind racing. She knew she had to find something tangible, something that couldn't be explained away as paranoia. As she sat on her bed, biting her nails, her phone buzzed with a new text from Chloe. "Did you find anything?" Emily stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. "No, but I'm going to." She set the phone down and pulled her knees up to her chest, staring out the window into the darkness of the night, the fear settling deeper into her bones. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. Emily froze, her ears straining in the silence. She slowly stood and opened her door just a crack, peeking out into the dimly lit hallway. And that's when she saw it, Daniel, standing perfectly still outside her mother's bedroom door, just staring. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there as if lost in thought or planning something. Emily's heart felt like it might explode. Then, suddenly Daniel turned his head and looked directly at her. Emily gasped, slamming her door shut and locking it, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. For what felt like hours, Emily sat pressed against her door, listening for any sound, any movement, but the house was silent again, as if nothing had happened. Eventually, her adrenaline faded just enough for her to crawl back into bed, but sleep was impossible. Every shadow in the room seemed to stretch and shift, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. When dawn finally broke, Emily was already up, pacing her room, her mind buzzing with plans. She knew now with absolute certainty that something was very wrong with Daniel. But how could she make her mom see it? She needed undeniable proof. She picked up her phone and texted Chloe. "We need help." Chloe responded almost instantly. "What kind of help?" Emily thought for a moment, then typed, "Someone who knows how to find stuff online." Chloe sent back a name almost immediately. "Ethan, the kid who hacks computers in math class." Emily's eyes widened. She knew who Chloe meant. Ethan was always glued to his laptop, muttering about firewalls and coding. She hesitated only for a second before replying. "Set it up." Later that day at school, Chloe led Emily to a small cafe near campus where Ethan was already waiting, his laptop open in front of him. He looked up as they approached, adjusting his glasses and giving them a curious smirk. "So, who are we digging up dirt on?" he asked, as if it was the most normal request in the world. Emily swallowed hard and said, "Daniel Carter." Ethan's fingers flew across the keyboard as he pulled up search engines, databases, and other mysterious tools Emily didn't even recognize. Minutes passed in tense silence until finally, Ethan frowned and looked up. "That's weird. There's nothing. No records, no social media, no property listings. It's like he doesn't exist." Emily's stomach dropped as that cold, familiar fear surged through her again. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. Something was seriously wrong. Emily sat there at the small cafe table, staring at Ethan as his words echoed in her head. "It's like he doesn't exist." That cold, sinking feeling in her chest deepened, wrapping around her like a vice. She looked at Chloe, who sat quietly beside her, now visibly more uneasy than she had been before. "See?" Emily whispered harshly, her voice trembling. "I told you something was wrong." Chloe nodded slowly, her bravado from before now replaced with genuine concern. Ethan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he studied Emily's reaction. "Look, sometimes people are just super private. Maybe he doesn't like social media, or maybe he goes by a different name online." Emily shook her head. "No, someone like him. He has money, he's got businesses, he's planning to marry my mom. There should be something, anything." She could feel the panic rising in her throat, but she swallowed it down, trying to stay calm. Ethan tilted his head, thoughtful. "There might be another way. If I can get his phone number, I could trace it, maybe find out who it's registered to. See if he's connected to anything shady." Emily's heart skipped a beat at that. "I can get it," she said without hesitation. Chloe gave her a concerned look, but Emily ignored it. This was too important. She had to know who Daniel really was. Later that night, when her mom had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Emily crept into her mom's room again, moving as silently as she could. She found her mom's phone on the nightstand, unlocked it, and quickly scrolled through the contacts until she found his number, Daniel Carter. She grabbed a pen from the drawer and wrote it down on a scrap of paper, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Then she slipped quietly out of the room, clutching the paper like it was a key to her own survival. Back in her bedroom, Emily texted the number to Ethan with shaking fingers. "Here it is." Less than a minute later, Ethan replied, "Got it. Give me a few minutes." Emily sat on her bed, staring at the screen, her heart pounding with every second that passed. She kept glancing at her bedroom door, half expecting Daniel to suddenly appear there, catching her in the act. The minutes stretched out like hours until finally, Ethan's next message popped up. "There's nothing. The number isn't registered to anyone. It's not linked to any accounts, businesses, or even public records. It's like a burner. Emily's blood went cold. A burner phone? Why would Daniel need a number that couldn't be traced? She clutched the phone tightly, her mind spiraling with all the terrifying possibilities. Chloe texted a moment later, "You okay?" Emily didn't know how to answer that. She wasn't okay, not even close. Every instinct in her body was screaming that she and her mom were in danger, but her mom wouldn't believe her unless she had something even more concrete. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She couldn't afford to panic now. "Thanks, Ethan," she typed, adding, "Let me know if you find anything else." Then she set her phone down, pulling her knees up to her chest and staring out the dark window again, the same way she had so many nights before. But this time felt different. This time, it wasn't just a vague sense of unease. Now there was evidence. Not enough to take to the police, not yet, but enough to know that her fears weren't irrational. They were real, and Emily realized that if she didn't act soon, it might be too late to save her mom or herself. The next morning, Emily woke up earlier than usual, her mind still replaying the messages from Ethan over and over again. She could barely eat her breakfast, her stomach twisting into knots as she sat silently at the kitchen table. Her mom, cheerful as ever, was making coffee while humming some tune, completely unaware of the storm building inside her daughter. Emily knew she had to say something, had to make her mom listen. "Mom, I need to talk." "To you. It's important," Emily said, her voice quieter than usual but loaded with urgency. Sarah turned around, giving her a soft, almost tired smile. "What is it, honey?" Emily looked past her to the living room, where Daniel sat, sipping coffee like he belonged there, like he was already part of their family. "Can we talk? In private?" she asked, glancing nervously at Daniel. Her mom frowned, puzzled by the request, but after a brief hesitation, she agreed. They stepped out onto the back porch, the morning air crisp and cool. Emily took a deep breath, then launched into it. "Mom, I looked him up. There's nothing about him anywhere. No social media, no records, nothing. His phone number isn't even registered. Doesn't that seem, I don't know, dangerous?" Sarah's face tightened in that familiar expression of patient frustration. "Emily, you're overthinking again. Not everyone puts their life online, you know." Emily shook her head, exasperated. "No, Mom, this is different. He's hiding something. I can feel it. Why won't you just listen to me?" Sarah sighed and rubbed her temples. "Because you don't want me to be happy, Emily. That's all this is." Those words hit Emily like a slap in the face, leaving her breathless. "No, I'm trying to protect you," she whispered, but her mom had already turned away, shaking her head as she walked back inside, leaving Emily standing there, alone and defeated. Emily stood on that porch for what felt like hours, the cool air doing nothing, to soothe the heat rising in her chest. She couldn't believe it. Her mom really thought this was about jealousy, about not wanting her to be happy. How could she not see that this was about something so much bigger, so much scarier? Emily eventually went back inside, her legs feeling like lead as she walked past Daniel, who looked up from his phone just long enough to flash her that same too-perfect smile. Her skin crawled, but she forced herself to keep moving, heading straight up to her room, and locking the door behind her. Sitting on her bed, she pulled out her phone and messaged Ethan. "She doesn't believe me. I need more proof." A minute later, his reply came. "Let me try something else." Emily clutched the phone tightly, her mind racing with questions. What else could they even do? A few hours later, as she sat by her window pretending to read, her phone buzzed again. It was Ethan. "I traced his phone activity. He's been in contact with another number. Guess who it belongs to?" Emily swallowed hard, her fingers trembling as she typed. "Who?" Ethan's next message made her heart stop. A woman who disappeared 2 years ago. Her name was Adriana. Emily stared at the screen, her blood running cold. All the pieces she'd been trying so hard to put together suddenly snapped into place with terrifying clarity. Daniel wasn't just some mysterious, overly perfect man. He was dangerous. And now, Emily knew that if she didn't act fast, her mom could be next. She sat there for a moment, paralyzed by fear, but then slowly stood up, her resolve hardening like steel. She wasn't going to let this happen. Not to her mom, not if she could help it. By the time Emily got to school the next morning, she was already looking for Chloe. weaving through the crowded hallways with a single mission in mind. She finally spotted her best friend at her locker, chatting and laughing with another classmate like it was just any other ordinary day. But for Emily, everything had changed. She marched straight up, grabbed Chloe's arm firmly, and pulled her aside without saying a word. Chloe blinked in surprise. "Emily, what's going on?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. Emily looked around quickly, making sure no one else was listening, then leaned in close. "I have proof. Real proof." Chloe's eyes widened. "What? What proof?" Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Ethan traced Daniel's phone and found out he's been in contact with a woman who disappeared 2 years ago. Her name's Adriana." Chloe's mouth fell open, speechless for a moment as she tried to process what Emily had just said. "Wait, are you serious?" Emily nodded grimly. "Totally. I knew something was wrong with him." Chloe ran a hand through her hair, pacing nervously. "So, what are you going to do now? I mean, this is huge." Emily looked down at her feet for a second, then met Chloe's gaze with a new, determined intensity. "I have to tell my mom. She has to believe me this time." Chloe bit her lip, unsure. "Do you really think she will? I mean, she hasn't so far." Emily sighed heavily, her heart sinking. "She has to. She just has to." Chloe placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "Okay, well, if you need me, I'm here." Emily nodded, grateful for that small bit of support, then glanced at the clock. The school day felt endless ahead of her, but her mind was already racing with how she'd confront her mom once she got home. Later that afternoon, Emily pushed open the front door of her house with a heavy sense of dread hanging over her. She could hear the faint sounds of her mom humming in the kitchen as she prepared dinner, the clinking of utensils against pots and pans, completely unaware of the dark cloud Emily was bringing into their home. For a moment, Emily stood there frozen, staring at the happy domestic scene that now felt so fragile, so breakable. Taking a deep breath, she walked into the kitchen and stood quietly by the doorway until Sarah noticed her. "Hey, sweetie, how was school?" her mom asked without looking up, slicing vegetables on the cutting board. Emily swallowed hard, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "Mom, we need to talk. It's serious." Sarah finally looked up, setting the knife down and wiping her hands on a towel. "Emily, if this is about Daniel again..." But Emily cut her off, her voice shaking with urgency. "No, Mom. This time I have proof. Real proof." Sarah frowned, her whole body tensing. "What kind of proof?" Emily took a deep breath, forcing the words out. "Daniel's phone. He's been in contact with a woman who disappeared 2 years ago. Her name's Adriana." Sarah stared at her, silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she shook her head slowly, disbelief written all over her face. "Emily, where did you even get that idea?" Emily felt like screaming. "It's true. Ethan helped me trace it. Mom, please, you have to believe me." Sarah rubbed her temples, clearly exhausted. "Emily, I know you're worried, but this is too much. You can't go around accusing someone of something like that without real evidence." Emily's heart shattered. Even now, with something this serious, her mom still didn't believe her. Emily stood there in the kitchen, her heart pounding against her chest as she watched her mom dismiss everything she had just said. "But Mom," she tried again, her voice breaking slightly under the weight of her frustration and fear. "I'm telling you the truth. I swear." But Sarah shook her head, turning back to her cutting board as if she could simply slice away the terrifying possibility that her daughter was presenting. "Emily, please, just stop. You've got to stop obsessing over this. You just don't want me to be happy." Those words felt like a dagger straight through Emily's heart. "No," she shouted, her voice louder and more desperate than she intended. "That's not it. I'm trying to protect you." Sarah paused for a second, her shoulders stiffening, but then she sighed and muttered, "I don't need protecting, Emily. I'm not some fragile thing. I know what I'm doing." But Emily couldn't let it go. She stepped closer, her voice low but urgent. "Mom, you don't know him like I do. You don't see the way he looks at me when you're not around. You don't see how he's watching everything." Sarah turned to her daughter then, her expression softening briefly before hardening again. "Emily, Daniel is a good man. You're just making this all up because you're scared of change." Emily stood there in silence, blinking back tears that were threatening to spill over. She realized in that moment that no matter what she said, her mom wasn't going to believe her. Not until it was too late. Without another word, Emily spun around and ran up to her room, slamming the door shut behind her, her whole body shaking with rage, fear, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. That night, Emily lay on her bed, staring up at the ceiling, her mind running in circles over and over again, like some endless nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She could still hear her mom's voice echoing in her head. "You just don't want me to be happy." It made her stomach twist painfully. How could her mom not see what was happening? How could she be so blind? Emily wiped angrily at her tears, then grabbed her phone and sent a message to Ethan. "She doesn't believe me. She thinks I'm making it up." A few seconds later, Ethan replied, "Don't give up. We'll figure something out." Emily stared at those words, wanting desperately to believe them, but everything felt so hopeless. Then, just as she was about to set her phone down, it buzzed again. It was Ethan. "Actually, I found something else." Emily's heart practically stopped. She sat up straight, her hands trembling as she typed. "What?" Ethan's next message came through quickly. "The woman, Adriana. Before she disappeared, she told a friend that she felt like someone was following her." Emily's blood turned to ice. She swallowed hard, rereading the message again and again, trying to make sense of it. Someone was following her. Could that someone have been Daniel? Emily didn't need to ask. Deep down, she already knew the answer. She could feel it in her bones. Her breathing quickened, and for a moment she felt like the walls of her room were closing in on her. She had been right all along. Daniel wasn't just hiding something. He was dangerous. And now, more than ever, Emily knew she had to find a way to stop him before her mom became his next victim. The next morning, Emily moved through the house like a ghost, barely able to look at her mom as she ate breakfast, or at Daniel, who was sitting at the kitchen table sipping his coffee as if he belonged there, as if everything in their lives was completely normal. But Emily knew better now. She knew the truth, or at least enough of it to know that her instincts had been right all along. As Daniel looked up and flashed her that signature charming smile, Emily forced herself to smile weakly in return, even though her insides were twisting into knots. "Good morning, Emily," he said, his voice smooth and pleasant, like always. Emily swallowed hard, nodding slightly. "Morning." Sarah didn't seem to notice anything unusual, busy fussing over toast and eggs, while Daniel set down his coffee cup and leaned slightly toward Emily. "Did you sleep well last night?" he asked, his eyes narrowing just a bit, like he was testing her, like he wanted to see if she would crack. Emily took a breath and forced her voice to stay even. "Fine, as always." But inside, she was screaming. She couldn't let him know that she was onto him, not yet. She had to play it cool, had to buy herself time to figure out what to do next. As she left the kitchen to grab her backpack for school, she could feel Daniel's eyes following her every step, and that made her skin crawl. Once outside, as she walked down the sidewalk toward the bus stop, she pulled out her phone and quickly messaged Chloe. "I need to get his phone, somehow." Chloe responded almost instantly. "Emily, are you sure about this? It's really risky." But Emily didn't hesitate. "I don't have a choice. I need proof. Real proof." Chloe simply replied, "Okay, I'm with you." At school that day, Emily could barely focus on her classes, her mind completely consumed with planning how she was going to get Daniel's phone without him realizing. She knew that he was always careful with it, always kept it close by, but there had to be a moment when he let his guard down. At lunch, she met up with Chloe behind the gym, where they always hung out when they needed privacy. "So, what's the plan?" Chloe asked, her arms crossed, her face showing a mixture of fear and determination. Emily sighed and ran a hand through her hair, pacing nervously. "He usually hangs up his coat in the front hall when he comes over. His phone's always in the pocket. If I can just get a few minutes alone." Chloe shook her head, biting her lip. "Emily, if he catches you?" Emily looked at her, eyes wide and full of that same desperate resolve. "Then he catches me. But I can't just sit here and do nothing. You know that." Chloe exhaled slowly, nodding. "Okay, then let's do it." That night, after dinner, Emily's chance finally came. Daniel was sitting in the living room with her mom, chatting about wedding plans, completely engrossed in their conversation. Emily quietly slipped into the hallway, where Daniel's coat was hanging on the rack, just like she expected. Her heart hammered against her ribcage as she reached into the pocket and felt the cold, hard shape of his phone. Just as her fingers closed around it, a voice behind her made her freeze in place. "What do you think you're doing?" It was Daniel. He was standing right there, his voice calm but laced with something dark, something dangerous. Emily turned slowly, her mind racing, her heart about to explode out of her chest. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she stared up at Daniel, his tall frame looming over her, his eyes darker than she had ever seen them before. He didn't raise his voice, didn't move suddenly. He didn't need to. The quiet menace in his tone was enough to send a jolt of terror through her entire body. "Just getting my mom's phone," Emily stammered, her voice trembling despite her best effort to sound calm. Daniel raised an eyebrow and then slowly, almost mockingly, pulled his own phone from the pocket on the other side of his coat. "You mean this one?" he asked, holding it up in front of her face, his smile razor sharp. Emily swallowed hard, her pulse pounding in her ears. I thought it was hers." Daniel tilted his head, studying her for a long, uncomfortable moment. "You know, you're a very smart girl, Emily. But sometimes, being too smart isn't such a good thing." His voice was low and deliberate, each word slicing through the air like a blade. Emily felt rooted too. The spot, her legs frozen, her brain screaming at her to run, but her body refusing to move. Just then, Sarah called out from the living room, oblivious to the charged scene in the hallway. "Emily, everything okay?" Daniel's expression didn't change as he calmly slipped his phone back into his pocket and leaned closer to Emily, his voice now barely a whisper. "Be careful, Emily. Curiosity can be dangerous." And then, just like that, he turned and walked casually back to the living room, leaving Emily standing there, her heart racing, her hands cold and clammy, and the overwhelming realization sinking in. He knew she was onto him, and now everything was more dangerous than ever. Emily barely made it up to her room before the adrenaline gave out and her legs buckled beneath her. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands still shaking as she stared down at them, trying to process what had just happened. He knew she was suspicious, and worse, he wasn't even trying that. Hard to hide it anymore. That made him even more terrifying. Grabbing her phone, she messaged Chloe in a frenzy. "He knows. He caught me." Chloe replied almost immediately. "OMG, are you okay?" Emily took a shaky breath and typed back, "Yeah, but I don't know what to do now." A moment later, Chloe responded, "You have to stop. It's too dangerous." But Emily shook her head, even though no one could see her. She couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close to figuring everything out. After a few deep breaths, she messaged Ethan next. "He knows I'm suspicious. What should I do?" Ethan's reply came quickly, as always. "If you can't get his phone, maybe there's another way. I've got a device. I can give it to you tomorrow. It can extract data from his phone remotely if it's connected to the same Wi-Fi." Emily's eyes widened. This could be it. This could be her chance. "Okay," she typed, her fingers moving with renewed purpose. "Let's do it." Ethan sent her the plan in detail, and Emily read it twice, committing every step to memory. She had no idea if it would actually work, but it was the only shot she had left. She placed her phone down carefully on the nightstand, then lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark, her mind racing, her heart filled with a mixture of terror and determination. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next day at school, Ethan handed Emily a small, unassuming device during lunch, sliding it discreetly across the table as they sat in the corner of the cafeteria. Emily picked it up, turning it over in her hands. It looked like nothing special, just a small black square with no buttons, no screens. But according to Ethan, it was powerful enough to connect to Daniel's phone as soon as they were both on the same Wi-Fi network. "Just get it close to him, near where he usually sits when he's at your house," Ethan whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Emily nodded, slipping the device into her backpack, her fingers tightening around the strap with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Chloe, sitting next to her, looked more worried than ever. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly, her eyes full of concern. Emily didn't hesitate. "I have to do this. He's dangerous, Chloe." "I know it." Chloe sighed, running her hand through her hair nervously. "Just be careful." Emily nodded, swallowing hard. The rest of the school day dragged on endlessly. every class a blur as her mind replayed the plan over and over again. By the time she got home, her stomach was in knots. And as expected, Daniel was already there, sitting on the living room sofa, casually scrolling through his phone while her mom prepared dinner in the kitchen. Emily took a deep breath, forcing herself to act normal as she greeted them. "Hi," she said quietly, earning a polite smile from Daniel and a distracted wave from her mom. She slipped off her backpack, carefully retrieving the device, and then moved toward the living room, pretending to tie her shoelaces as she subtly slid the gadget beneath the couch where Daniel always sat. Emily's heart pounded wildly as she straightened up, forcing herself to breathe evenly as she walked back toward the kitchen, pretending everything was fine. She grabbed a glass of water from the sink, her hands trembling as she glanced over her shoulder at Daniel, who was still sitting comfortably on the couch, completely unaware of what she had just done. It was working. She checked her phone quickly, opening the app Ethan had installed for her. A notification popped up almost immediately. Device connected, extracting data. Emily nearly dropped her phone in shock, her pulse spiking as she realized this was really happening. She forced herself to stay calm, casually sitting at the kitchen table and scrolling through her texts as if nothing out of the ordinary was going on. Daniel eventually stood up, walking into the kitchen to grab a drink, passing right by Emily without a second glance. But even as he smiled and made small talk with her mom, Emily could feel the tension thick in the air, like an invisible thread tightening with every passing second. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel finally said he had to head out for a work meeting, giving Sarah a quick kiss on the cheek before grabbing his coat and heading for the door. The moment it clicked shut behind him, Emily bolted for her phone, her hands shaking as she checked the app. A new message from Ethan popped up. "Got the data. You won't believe what's on here." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She quickly typed back, "What is it?" A minute later, Ethan replied, "Meet me at the cafe after school tomorrow. It's too much to explain over text." Emily sat back in her chair, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She didn't know what Ethan had found, but she knew one thing for sure. It was going to change everything. The next day after school, Emily rushed straight to the small cafe where she, Chloe, and Ethan had met before. She spotted Ethan sitting at a table in the corner, his laptop open in front of him, his expression unusually serious. Chloe was already there too, perched on the edge of her chair, fidgeting nervously. As Emily slid into the seat across from them, she could barely contain her anxiety. "What did you find?" she asked breathlessly, leaning forward as if the table between them wasn't even there. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his laptop around so Emily could see the screen. As the images loaded one by one, Emily's stomach dropped. The first photo was of a woman, Adriana, Ethan explained. Emily's heart clenched as she stared at the picture of the woman who had disappeared 2 years ago. But as Ethan clicked through the files, the images got progressively worse. There were photos of Adriana tied up, looking terrified, in what appeared to be some kind of basement or dark room. Emily clapped her hand over her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes as the reality hit her. This wasn't just some vague suspicion anymore. This was real. Ethan clicked to the final photo. Adriana's body, lifeless, in that same dark room. Emily felt like the floor had just been ripped out from under her. She couldn't breathe. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice breaking as she looked away from the screen. Chloe sat beside her, pale as a sheet, her hands trembling. Ethan closed the laptop, his voice quiet but firm. "Emily, Daniel's dangerous. You were right." Emily wiped at her eyes furiously, her hands shaking as she tried to process what she had just seen. She felt sick, horrified, but also more determined than ever. "I need to show this to my mom," she said finally, her voice filled with steely resolve. But Ethan shook his head quickly, his expression grim. "Emily, these photos, they're not enough. If you show them to your mom, she'll think you're making it up. She'll say you faked them, or that they're from the internet." Daniel could deny everything. Emily stared at him, her mind spinning. "But this is proof. It's real," she argued. But Ethan shook his head again, not without something that ties it directly to him, something irrefutable. Emily swallowed hard, realizing he was right. Her mom was already so deep under Daniel's spell, so convinced that Emily was just being jealous and paranoid. She needed something bigger, something Daniel couldn't talk his way out of. "Like what?" Emily asked, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan leaned closer, lowering his voice even more. A confession, or something with his name on it, something he can't deny. Emily sat back in her chair, staring at the table in silence. How was she supposed to get Daniel to confess to something like this? It felt impossible. Chloe reached over, squeezing Emily's hand gently. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. Emily nodded, though doubt gnawed at her insides. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, she couldn't stop replaying the horrific images in her mind. The woman who had vanished, the woman Daniel had been seeing, the woman who was now dead, and her mom. Her mom was next, if Emily didn't do something. Clutching her blanket tightly around her, Emily made a silent promise to herself. She was going to stop Daniel, no matter what it took, even if it meant putting herself in danger, even if no one believed her. She had to protect her mom. She had to stop him before it was too late. The next morning, Emily woke up with a pit in her stomach, but also with a plan forming in the back of her mind. She couldn't shake what Ethan had said. The photos weren't enough. She needed something more, something undeniable. As she walked downstairs, she heard Daniel's voice coming from the kitchen, chatting cheerfully with her mom over breakfast like he was just an ordinary guy, not the monster Emily now knew he was. She stood silently in the hallway for a moment, watching them through the, doorway. Sarah laughed at something Daniel said, completely oblivious to the truth. Emily's hands clenched into fists. She couldn't stand the thought of her mom being so close to someone so dangerous. She walked into the kitchen and forced a neutral expression onto her face. "Morning," she said quietly. Daniel turned and smiled at her, that same practiced, charming grin he always wore. "Good morning, Emily. Did you sleep well?" Emily nodded, keeping her voice steady. "Yeah, fine." But as she sat at the table, she could feel Daniel's eyes lingering on her for just a little too long, as if he were trying to figure out what she was thinking, or what she knew. Emily looked down at her plate, pushing her food around without eating. Sarah noticed and asked, "You okay, sweetie?" Emily forced another smile. "Yeah, just tired." But inside she was screaming. After breakfast, Daniel stood up and grabbed his coat, telling Sarah he had to head out for a meeting. As he left, he gave Emily one last look, a knowing, almost smug glance that made her skin crawl. She waited until he was gone, then turned to her mom, her heart pounding. "Mom, can we talk?" Sarah sighed, already looking exasperated. "Emily, if this is about Daniel again." But Emily shook her head firmly. "Just listen, please." Taking a deep breath, Emily sat across from her mom at the kitchen table, struggling to find the right words. "Mom, I know you think I'm just jealous or whatever, but it's not that. It's really not." Sarah sighed, leaning back in her chair with that tired, worn-out expression Emily had seen so many times lately. "Emily, I really don't want to have this conversation again." But Emily pressed on, her voice trembling with emotion. "You don't understand. I've been looking into him, and there's nothing. No records, no social media, no work history. His phone number isn't even registered. And there's more." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her skepticism already building. "What more?" Emily swallowed hard. "He was in contact with a woman who disappeared 2 years ago. Her name was Adriana." For a moment, Sarah just sat there, blinking at her daughter like she didn't understand the words. Then she shook her head, letting out a soft, disbelieving laugh. "Emily, this is ridiculous. Where are you even getting this from?" Emily's voice rose in frustration. "It's true. Ethan helped me trace his phone. We found photos. Horrible photos." Her voice broke then, and tears welled up in her eyes. Sarah's expression hardened. "Emily, you've gone too far this time. This is serious. You can't just accuse someone of something like that without proof." Emily wiped at her eyes furiously. "I have proof," she insisted. But even as she said it, she knew her mom wouldn't believe her. Sarah stood up abruptly, walking over to the sink. "Emily, I know you're upset about me moving on, but this is too much. I trust Daniel. He's good to me." Emily sat there in stunned silence, her chest aching. No matter what she said, it was like yelling into the wind. Her mom was too far gone. That night, Emily lay awake in her bed, staring at the dark ceiling, her mind spinning with fear, frustration, and helplessness. No matter how much evidence she had, her mom just refused to see the truth. Every attempt to warn her felt like shouting into a void, and it was breaking Emily apart inside. As the hours dragged on, she kept replaying the conversation in the kitchen. Her mom's dismissive tone, the disbelief in her eyes, the way she had defended Daniel so easily. It made Emily's blood boil, but it also made her realize something else. She couldn't rely on her mom to protect herself. She had to find a way to stop Daniel, even if it meant doing it all on her own. Suddenly her phone buzzed on the nightstand, making her jump. She grabbed it and saw a new message from Ethan. "I've been digging more. There's something you should know." Emily's heart pounded as she quickly typed back, "What?" A moment later, Ethan replied, "Adriana. She was Daniel's girlfriend, before she disappeared." Emily's breath caught in her throat as she read and reread those words. It was all coming together now. The woman who vanished without a trace. The same woman Daniel had been in contact with, and now her mom was engaged to him. Emily clutched her phone tightly, feeling sick to her stomach. This wasn't just about a bad feeling anymore. Daniel had a pattern, and her mom was about to become the next victim. She texted Ethan back, her hands trembling. "We have to stop him. Now." Ethan replied, "Agreed, but we need more. Something that no one can deny." Emily lay back down, staring at the ceiling once more, her mind racing through every possible scenario. She knew what she had to do. She had to confront Daniel directly. It was the only way. The next day, Emily couldn't concentrate on anything at school. Every class passed by in a blur, the teachers' voices sounding muffled and distant as if she were underwater. All she could think about was how to confront Daniel, how to get him to slip up, to say something incriminating that she could record and use as undeniable proof. During lunch, she sat with Chloe and Ethan under their usual tree in the courtyard, going over the plan for what felt like the 100th time. "You're sure you want to do this?" Chloe asked for the 10th time, her voice filled with worry. Emily nodded, her expression steely. "It's the only way. My mom won't listen unless I have something solid." Ethan handed her a small, discreet recording device, no bigger than a pen cap. "Just keep this in your pocket. Press here to start recording. Don't let him see it." Emily took it and slipped it into the inside pocket of her jacket, her fingers brushing over the tiny button. "Thanks," she whispered. Chloe leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Be careful, Em. If he finds out." Emily nodded, understanding the danger completely. "I know, but I don't have a choice." That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their living room, Emily sat on the couch, waiting. Her heart pounded violently in her chest as she heard the front door open and Daniel's familiar voice call out, "Hello?" She swallowed hard, standing up and smoothing down her jacket. "Hi, Daniel," she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the terror building inside her. He smiled at her as he walked in, setting down his keys. "Hey, Emily, everything okay?" She nodded, forcing a small, innocent smile. "Yeah. Actually, can we talk? Just the two of us?" Daniel raised an eyebrow but nodded slowly. "Of course." Emily led him into the living room, every step feeling like she was walking a tightrope with no safety net. Emily sat down on the armchair across from the sofa, her heart thudding so loudly she was sure Daniel could hear it. He sat comfortably, one arm draped over the back of the couch, wearing that same casual smile that she now knew hid something so much darker. "So, what did you want to talk about?" he asked, his voice calm, almost amused. Emily swallowed hard and pressed the button on the recording device hidden inside her jacket pocket, praying that he wouldn't notice. She leaned forward slightly, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I know about Adriana," she said quietly, watching for any flicker in his expression. For a split second, his smile faltered, but then it returned just as quickly, smoother than ever. "I'm not sure I know what you're talking about," he replied evenly. But Emily wasn't backing down, not now. "She was your girlfriend, before she disappeared. I know you talked to her right before it happened." Daniel tilted his head, pretending to look confused, but there was something different in his eyes now. A sharpness, a calculation that wasn't there a moment ago. "Emily," he said slowly, "you've always been such a smart girl, but sometimes knowing too much can be dangerous." Emily's breath caught in her throat at the thinly veiled threat, but she forced herself to push further. "Did you hurt her?" she asked bluntly, her voice just above a whisper. Daniel leaned back, letting out a soft chuckle. "That's quite an accusation," he said, then added, almost as an afterthought, "You know, people disappear all the time. Some of them just make bad choices." Emily felt a chill race down her spine at the way he said it, so casual, so detached. She glanced down briefly at her jacket, silently praying the recorder was picking up every single word. Before she could say anything else, Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees and fixing her with a cold, piercing stare. "You know, Emily, I always admired how brave you are. Not many kids would confront an adult like this." His voice was soft, almost affectionate, but there was an unmistakable edge of menace beneath it. Emily's hands balled into fists inside her jacket sleeves, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to show how terrified she was. "I just want to know the truth," she said, her voice steady despite the panic gripping her insides. Daniel smirked, shaking his head slowly. "The truth," he repeated, as if tasting the word. Then, after a long pause, he added in a voice so low she almost didn't hear it, "The truth is, some people can't leave well enough alone, and that usually gets them hurt." Emily's breath hitched, her pulse skyrocketing as she realized exactly what he was implying. But before she could react, her mom's voice called from the kitchen. "Emily? Daniel? Is everything okay in there?" Daniel straightened up instantly, his charming smile snapping back into place like a mask. "All good," he called back cheerfully, then turned to Emily, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We'll finish this conversation later." And with that he stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked casually into the kitchen, leaving Emily sitting there, frozen, her mind racing. She quickly reached into her jacket pocket and pressed the stop button on the recorder, her hands trembling. She had done it. She had recorded him. Not an outright confession, but enough of a threat, enough to show her mom, to prove that Daniel wasn't the man he pretended to be. Emily sat there for a moment, catching her breath before slowly standing up, the recorder clutched tightly in her shaking hand. Emily stood there in the living room for what felt like an eternity, her fingers gripping the tiny recorder so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her heart was pounding, her breath coming in shallow bursts, but she knew what she had to do. This was her chance, the only one she might ever get, to make her mom finally see the truth about Daniel. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, and walked slowly into the kitchen where Sarah and Daniel were standing, chatting casually as if nothing at all had happened. Emily's eyes locked onto her mom's. "Mom," she said, her voice wavering slightly but full of determination. Sarah turned to her with a warm, distracted smile. "What is it, sweetie?" Emily glanced at Daniel, who stood there leaning against the counter, sipping from a glass of water, his expression cool and collected as always. She swallowed hard, then looked back at her mom. "I need to show you something. It's important." Sarah raised an eyebrow, sensing the seriousness in her daughter's tone, and set her coffee mug down. "Okay, what is it?" Emily took a step closer, pulled the recorder from her pocket, and pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the room, calm and menacing all at once. "The truth is, some people can't leave well enough alone, and that usually gets them hurt." As the words played out, the blood drained from Sarah's face. She turned slowly to look at Daniel, who had gone completely still, his eyes fixed on Emily with a sharp, predatory glint. Sarah's voice came out in a whisper, full of disbelief. "Daniel, what is this?" For a moment Daniel didn't say anything, just stood there, his mask cracking ever so slightly as the air in the room turned thick with tension. Then, with a slow, almost resigned sigh, Daniel set his glass down on the counter and straightened up. He looked between Emily and Sarah, his charming facade crumbling away to reveal something much colder, much more dangerous underneath. "Well," he said softly, "looks like you've been a very clever girl, Emily." Sarah stared at him, her eyes wide with horror. "Daniel, is this some kind of joke?" But Daniel just smiled, faintly, and shook his head. "No joke." He took a step toward Emily, who instinctively backed up, her heart thudding painfully against her chest. Sarah moved quickly, stepping between them. "Stay away from her," she snapped, her voice filled with a strength Emily had never heard before. Daniel stopped, raising his hand slightly in mock surrender. "Relax, Sarah. No need to get dramatic." But his eyes flicked to the recorder in Emily's hand, and Emily could see the calculation happening in his mind. as if he were trying to figure out how to spin this, how to regain control. Suddenly, loud knocking thundered against the front door, making all three of them jump. "Police! Open up!" came a voice from outside. Emily's breath caught. Ethan had called them, just like they'd planned if things went wrong. Daniel's eyes widened, and for the first time, Emily saw real fear flash across his face. "What did you do?" he hissed, glaring at her. But Emily stood tall, gripping the recorder like a lifeline. "What I had to," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the terror inside her. Sarah looked between them, her face pale and confused, but as the police knocked again, she finally seemed to understand. "Get out of my house, Daniel," she whispered fiercely. But it was too late. The door burst open, and officers flooded inside, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Daniel barely had time to react before he was forced to the ground and handcuffed. The hours that followed were a blur for Emily. She sat on the living room couch, her knees pulled up to her chest, as police officers moved through the house, asking questions, collecting evidence, and taking Daniel away in the back of a squad car. Sarah sat beside her, silent and pale, staring blankly at the floor as if her entire world had just shattered, which, in a way, it had. Emily kept replaying everything that had happened, from the moment she first felt that unsettling instinct about Daniel, to the confrontation in the living room, and finally, the sight of him being handcuffed and shoved into the police car. It didn't feel real yet. It was like she was watching someone else's life unfold, not her own. But then her mom finally turned to her, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "Emily, I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking with guilt and grief. Emily shook her head, tears of her own welling up now. "Mom, I couldn't let him hurt you." Sarah reached over and wrapped her arms tightly around Emily, pulling her into a fierce hug. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered into her daughter's hair. Emily clung to her mom, feeling a mixture of relief, sadness, and lingering fear. She wasn't sure when, or if, that fear would ever fully go away. But for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could finally breathe again. The nightmare was over. Daniel was gone, and she had been the one to stop him. Not the adults, not the police, not anyone else. Her. In the days that followed, Emily struggled to process everything that had happened. There were reporters camped outside their house for a while, news articles circulating about the disappearance of Adriana and how Daniel Carter had finally been arrested in connection with multiple missing persons cases. It was surreal to see the story plastered all over the internet, especially after all the times she had searched for him and found nothing. Now, the world finally knew the truth. But even with Daniel behind bars, Emily found herself looking over her shoulder sometimes, jumping at small noises, waking up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat. Her mom started going to therapy, and Emily did too, working together to heal from everything they'd endured. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but they were getting through it, together. Chloe and Ethan remained by her side the whole time, her two closest allies in what had felt like an impossible battle. And even though Emily was only 12, she realized that she had faced something that most adults couldn't even imagine. She had trusted her instincts when no one else would, and she had fought to protect the person she loved most in the world. That experience changed her forever. She was no longer just the quiet girl who sat by the window noticing things others didn't. She was a survivor, and even though the scars would always be there, she knew now that she was stronger than she had ever thought possible. As she sat by her window one afternoon, watching the sun set behind the trees, Emily allowed herself a small, genuine smile for the first time in weeks. She had made it through. They both had.